The sun was setting over a quaint little town in Oregon, painting the sky in hues of amber and crimson. Nestled in the heart of the town was a cozy cafe called the Ember Roast. Known for its aromatic coffee and warm, inviting ambiance, it was a place where locals gathered to chat, work, or escape the bustle of life. The cafe was typically a haven of peace until the day controversy walked through its doors. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. That particular evening, Michael Dawson, a proud Republican and small business owner, entered the cafe. Michael was the kind of man who believed in hard work and individual freedoms, values he felt were slipping away in modern America. Today, as always, he wore his MAGA hat, a bold red cap that had become both a symbol of his political beliefs and a lightning rod for controversy. Michael wasn't looking for trouble. He just wanted a hot cup of coffee before heading home after a long day at work. As the bell above the door jingled announcing his arrival, heads turned in the cafe. Conversations faltered as eyes darted toward the conspicuous hat perched on his head. Behind the counter stood Emma Hayes, the cafe's owner. A fiery, progressive woman in her late 30s, Emma had cultivated the Ember Roast as a safe space for open-minded individuals who shared her values. She prided herself on creating an inclusive environment, but her definition of inclusivity didn't always align with the views of everyone in the town. Michael approached the counter, the soft creak of his work boots the only sound in the suddenly silent room. Emma noticed the hat immediately. Her jaw tightened, and her lips pressed into a thin line. She had seen the divisive symbol before, but rarely in her cafe. For Emma, the hat wasn't just a political statement, it represented a broader ideology she felt excluded and endangered many people, including members of her community. "Good evening," Michael said, his voice calm and friendly. "Could I get a black coffee, please?" Emma hesitated. She glanced at the hat, then at Michael's face. Her internal conflict was evident. Finally, she crossed her arms and said, "I'm sorry, but we reserve the right to refuse service. I can't serve you wearing that." Michael blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You heard me," Emma replied, her tone firm but not raised. "That hat represents hatred and division. I don't want it in my cafe." A murmur spread through the cafe as customers exchanged glances. Some nodded in agreement with Emma's decision, while others looked uneasy. Michael's face turned red, not with embarrassment, but with anger. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "This is America," he said, his voice growing louder. "I have the right to wear whatever I want, and I sure as hell have the right to buy a cup of coffee. And I have the right to decide who I serve," Emma shot back. "This is my business, and I won't tolerate that kind of symbolism here." The tension in the room was palpable. Michael stood his ground, refusing to leave. "You're discriminating against me because of my political beliefs," he said. "Isn't that the opposite of what you claim to stand for?" Emma opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, an older woman seated near the window spoke up. "Come on now," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Is this really necessary?" Everyone turned to look at the woman. Her name was Margaret, a retired schoolteacher and longtime regular at the cafe. She was known for her wisdom and fair-mindedness, and she often mediated conflicts in town. "Emma," Margaret continued, addressing the cafe owner, "I understand where you're coming from, but shutting people out because you disagree with them, doesn't that just create more division?" Emma looked conflicted. She respected Margaret and valued her opinion, but her principles were deeply ingrained. "I hear you, Margaret," she said, "but where do we draw the line? If I let him in with that hat, what's next?" "What's next," Margaret said softly, "is a chance for understanding, maybe even common ground." Michael, though still bristling with indignation, felt a flicker of something unexpected. Curiosity. He hadn't come to the cafe for a political debate, but now he found himself wondering if he had been too quick to judge people like Emma. He didn't agree with her, but he realized they might have more in common than he thought. Emma sighed, her resolve faltering. "Fine," she said after a long pause. "You can have your coffee, but don't think this means I agree with you." Michael nodded, trying to suppress a triumphant grin. "I'll take it black," he said. As Emma prepared the coffee, the tension in the cafe began to ease. Conversations resumed, though they were quieter than before. When Emma handed Michael his cup, he looked her in the eye and said, "Thank you." She didn't respond, but the smallest hint of a nod betrayed her acknowledgement. Michael took a seat near the window, sipping his coffee and observing the other patrons. He noticed a young couple discussing environmental issues, a group of students working on a project, and an artist sketching in a notebook. It struck him that despite their differences, everyone in the cafe shared a desire for connection and self-expression. Before long, Margaret approached his table. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. Not at all, Michael said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Margaret sat down and smiled. I have to say, you surprised me, she said. Most people would have stormed out after what happened. Michael chuckled. I guess I'm not most people. They talked for nearly an hour, their conversation ranging from politics to family to the best fishing spots in the area. Margaret shared stories of her years as a teacher, and Michael opened up about the challenges of running his business. They didn't agree on everything. Far from it, but they found common ground in their shared love for the community. As the cafe began to empty, Emma couldn't help but notice the unlikely duo chatting and laughing at the corner table. She felt a pang of guilt for how she had treated Michael earlier. Maybe Margaret was right, she thought. Maybe it was possible to find understanding even with people who seemed so different. Before leaving, Michael approached the counter again. I want to apologize, he said, his tone sincere. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just wanted some coffee. Emma hesitated, then said, and I want to apologize for how I handled things. I let my emotions get the better of me. They exchanged a brief but genuine handshake, and Michael left the cafe with a sense of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. Over the next few weeks, something remarkable happened. Michael became a regular at the Ember Roast, and his presence sparked a series of honest, open conversations among the patrons. Emma, inspired by Margaret's wisdom, started hosting dialogue nights, where people from all walks of life could come together to discuss their views in a respectful environment. The cafe became a beacon of unity in the town, proving that even in a world divided by politics and ideology, there was still room for connection and understanding, and it all started with a cup of coffee. The following week saw a transformation at the Ember Roast. The cafe that had once been a relatively quiet corner of town, home to casual small talk and solitary patrons with their laptops, now buzzed with an unusual energy. Word of the initial confrontation between Michael Dawson and Emma Hayes spread like wildfire, sparking debates across town. People were curious to see for themselves the unlikely dynamic that had unfolded between the conservative man in the red MAGA hat and the progressive cafe owner. Michael, true to his word, became a regular. At first, his presence caused unease. Some patrons, especially those who shared Emma's views, initially regarded him with suspicion. The MAGA hat was an undeniable symbol of political conflict, and its wearer a reminder of the country's divisions. But as the days passed, something interesting began to happen. People who might never have engaged with someone like Michael began to overhear his conversations. Slowly, they discovered a man who was not a caricature of his political identity, but someone with deeply personal experiences and reasons behind his beliefs. For Michael, his growing comfort at the cafe marked a turning point. He had not anticipated becoming part of an experiment in bridging ideological gaps, but he found himself embracing the role. Over time, he began leaving his MAGA hat in his truck before entering the Ember Roast. This wasn't out of shame or a concession of his values. Michael was as firm in his convictions as ever, but rather, he realized the hat often acted as a barrier, precluding meaningful conversations before they could begin. The absence of the hat didn't go unnoticed. One evening, Emma approached him as he sipped his coffee at the same corner table he now claimed as his own. "No hat today?" she asked with a raised brow, her tone lighter than it had been during their first exchange. Michael looked up, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "Figured I'd give everyone a break," he replied. "Thought maybe people would talk to me instead of the hat." Emma couldn't help but chuckle. "Fair enough. I suppose that's progress." In truth, Emma had found herself reflecting more deeply on that initial confrontation than she expected. The days following their encounter had left her questioning the boundaries of her values. She had always seen herself as a champion of inclusivity, yet she had acted in a way that excluded someone based solely on a piece of clothing. It was Margaret's voice that lingered in her mind. Doesn't that just create more division? In an effort to make amends, Emma decided to lean into the cafe's newfound reputation as a place of dialogue. She designed flyers for the first dialogue night, inviting anyone and everyone in town to join in respectful discussions about important issues. She hung them in the cafe's windows, placed them on community boards, and even handed one to Michael. "I'm not much of a public speaker," Michael said when she extended the flyer toward him. "It's not a debate," Emma clarified. "Just people sharing their perspectives. And who knows? You might surprise yourself." Michael hesitated, then accepted the flyer with a nod. "We'll see." Emma opened the evening with a few words. "This cafe has always been about community," she began. "But recent events reminded me that community means more than just gathering people who agree with you. It's about creating space for everyone, even those who see the world differently. Tonight, let's listen to each other. Not to respond or argue, but to understand." Her words set the tone for the evening. Conversations ranged from climate change to healthcare to education reform. Michael, sitting at a table with a mix of patrons, found himself sharing stories about his struggles as a small business owner. He spoke about the challenges of navigating government regulations and the pride he took in providing jobs for his employees. Others at the table responded with their own experiences. One man worked as a teacher and shared concerns about underfunded schools, while a woman in her 20s talked about her student debt and fears for the future. Michael was struck by how much common ground they discovered. While their solutions to these issues varied, their desire for a better future was universal. For the first time in years, Michael felt hopeful about the possibility of bridging political divides. As the evening went on, Emma noticed something remarkable. The conversations weren't just respectful, they were meaningful. People were leaning in, nodding, and asking questions. Even those who might have entered the cafe with skepticism seemed to soften as they realized they were being truly heard. At one point, Margaret, the ever-wise mediator, took the microphone. "I've lived in this town for a long time," she began, her voice steady and warm, "and I've seen how much we can accomplish when we come together. Tonight has reminded me of something important. It's not about winning arguments, it's about building relationships. We don't have to agree on everything to care about each other." Her words were met with a round of applause. Emma caught Michael's eye and saw him clapping along with the rest. It was a moment of quiet validation for her decision to host the event. In the weeks that followed, Dialogue Night became a regular occurrence at the Ember Roast. Each one brought new faces and new topics, from local zoning laws to national policy debates. Michael, once hesitant, became one of the most active participants. His straightforward, no-nonsense approach earned him respect, even from those who disagreed with him. Meanwhile, Emma found her own perspectives evolving. While she didn't waver in her core beliefs, she began to see the nuances in issues she had once viewed in black and white terms. She and Michael still had their disagreements, sometimes heated ones, but there was a mutual respect that had grown between them. One day, as they chatted after a particularly spirited dialogue night, Emma said, "You know, Michael, if someone told me a few months ago that you and I would be having civil conversations, I would have laughed in their face." Michael grinned. "I would have laughed too. But here we are." Their camaraderie became emblematic of the cafe's transformation. People began to refer to the Ember Roast as a model for the nation, a microcosm of what America could be if people took the time to listen. Local media picked up the story, and soon the cafe was featured in regional newspapers and online blogs. Emma received emails from people across the country, praising her initiative and asking for advice on creating similar spaces in their own communities. But the newfound attention wasn't without its challenges. Not everyone was thrilled about the cafe's direction. Some longtime patrons felt uncomfortable with the influx of political conversations, longing for the days when the Ember Roast was simply a place to relax. A few even stopped coming altogether. Emma struggled with how to address these concerns. She didn't want to alienate anyone, but she also believed in the importance of the work they were doing. After much deliberation, she decided to host a special evening for feedback, inviting patrons to share their thoughts on the cafe's new identity. The event was less structured than the dialogue nights, but just as heartfelt. "I miss the quiet," one man admitted. "I come here to get away from all the noise of the world." "I get that," Emma said, "and I want this place to feel welcoming for everyone. Maybe we can find a balance." Suggestions poured in, from designated quiet hours to adding more non-political events like live music or art nights. Emma took it all to heart, determined to ensure that the Ember Roast remained a space for all. Despite these occasional bumps, the cafe continued to thrive. Emma and Michael's unlikely friendship became something of a local legend. They even collaborated on a community project, organizing a town cleanup event that brought together volunteers from across the political spectrum. It was a resounding success, further cementing the cafe's reputation as a force for good. One evening, as the cafe began to close, Emma and Michael found themselves sitting at the counter, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" Emma asked, her voice tinged with amusement. Michael chuckled. "Hard to forget. You almost kicked me out." Emma shook her head, smiling. "I can't believe how much has changed since then." "It's funny," Michael said. "I came in that day thinking we had nothing in common, but it turns out we care about a lot of the same things. We just see different paths to get there." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe that's the lesson. We don't have to agree on the path as long as we're willing to walk together." Their words hung in the air, a quiet testament to the power of connection. As the last of the lights dimmed and the cafe doors closed for the night, it was clear that the Ember Roast had become more than a coffee shop. It was a symbol of what was possible when people chose to see beyond the symbols and slogans to the humanity that lay beneath. In a divided world, it was a small but significant reminder that change often begins not with sweeping gestures, but with a single conversation over a cup of coffee. And sometimes, that's all it takes to bridge the unlikeliest of divides. As the months passed, the Ember Roast solidified its role in the community as more than a cafe. It became a hub for transformation. The ripple effects of that initial confrontation between Michael and Emma had extended far beyond what either of them could have anticipated. From dialogue nights to impromptu discussions over coffee, the cafe became a symbol of unity in a time when division seemed insurmountable. Yet the journey was far from smooth. The newfound fame brought challenges that tested Emma's resolve, Michael's patience, and the community's willingness to adapt. One such challenge came in the form of an online backlash. One morning, Emma woke up to an inbox flooded with emails and social media notifications. A national political pundit, known for his incendiary rhetoric, had picked up on the cafe's story and twisted it into an exaggerated narrative. He claimed that Emma's Cafe was an example of left-wing indoctrination masquerading as civility. The segment went viral, and within hours, the cafe's social media pages were inundated with hate-filled messages. Emma's heart sank as she scrolled through the comments. Strangers accused her of everything from suppressing free speech to staging events for publicity. Some even called for boycotts. She felt the weight of it pressing down on her, threatening to undo all the good the cafe had accomplished. Michael, too, caught wind of the controversy. Though he had no social media presence himself, word spread quickly in the small town. He made his way to the cafe that afternoon, finding Emma in the back room, staring at her laptop with a mixture of frustration and sadness. "Emma," he said, knocking lightly on the doorframe. "You okay?" She looked up, her face pale. "Not really. Have you seen the news?" "I heard about it," he admitted. "People will say anything to get clicks. Don't let it get to you." "That's easy for you to say," Emma replied, her voice trembling. "This place, what we've built, it means everything to me. And now it feels like it's falling apart." Michael pulled up a chair sitting across from her. "It's not falling apart," he said firmly. "Look, people are always going to have their opinions, but you know the truth. The people who come here know the truth. That's what matters." Emma exhaled, trying to steady herself. "What if it gets worse? What if people stop coming because they don't want to deal with the drama?" Michael leaned back, crossing his arms. "Then we remind them why they come here in the first place. You can't control what people out there say, but you can control what happens here." His words, though simple, struck a chord with Emma. She realized he was right. The cafe had weathered challenges before, and it would weather this one too. The key was staying true to its mission. The backlash did have a tangible impact. A handful of patrons stopped coming, unwilling to risk being associated with the controversy. Emma received several cancellations for events she had planned, and for a while the cafe's foot traffic slowed. But for every setback, there were moments of hope. One afternoon, a group of students from the local high school organized a Support Ember Roast rally. Dozens of people gathered outside the cafe holding signs that read, "Unity over division and coffee for all." The sight brought tears to Emma's eyes. She realized just how much the cafe had come to mean to the community. Even Michael, who preferred to avoid the spotlight, found himself drawn into the effort to defend the cafe. He spoke at one of the dialogue nights, addressing the recent backlash directly. "Listen," he said, standing at the microphone, his voice steady but impassioned. "I didn't agree with Emma when I first walked into this place. Hell, I didn't even want to be here after what happened. But over time, I realized something. This cafe isn't about agreeing or disagreeing. It's about respect. It's about sitting down with someone and realizing they're more than the label you've put on them. That's what makes this place special, and no online rant is going to take that away." His words were met with resounding applause, and Emma couldn't help but feel a swell of gratitude. Michael, the man she had once seen as the antithesis of her values, had become one of the cafe's fiercest defenders. As the controversy began to die down, the cafe's focus shifted toward deeper engagement with the community. Emma decided to expand the dialogue nights into a series of workshops, bringing in guest speakers from various fields to educate and inspire patrons. Topics range from local history to conflict resolution to the art of effective communication. One of the most popular workshops was led by Margaret, the retired teacher who had played such a pivotal role in bridging the gap between Emma and Michael. Her session, titled "Listening Beyond Words," focused on teaching active listening skills. Margaret began the workshop by addressing the room. We've all been in conversations where we're more focused on what we're going to say next than on what the other person is actually saying. Real listening, listening to understand, not to respond, is one of the most powerful tools we have for connection. The workshop was interactive, with exercises that paired participants with people they didn't know well. One activity involved sharing a personal story while the other person listened without interrupting. At the end, the listener had to summarize what they had heard, ensuring they truly understood the speaker's perspective. Michael partnered with a young woman named Lila, a college student who often brought her laptop to the cafe to work on essays. They had never spoken beyond polite nods, but during the exercise, Michael learned about her passion for environmental science and her fears about the future of the planet. In turn, he shared his concerns about how environmental regulations sometimes impacted small businesses like his. Though their perspectives differed, they both walked away with a deeper appreciation for the other's viewpoint. The workshops quickly became a cornerstone of the Ember Roast's offerings. They attracted a diverse crowd, from local activists to curious newcomers, and even people from neighboring towns. The cafe's reputation as a place for meaningful connection only grew, drawing visitors from far and wide. Amid this growth, Emma and Michael continued to strengthen their friendship. One day, after a particularly busy dialogue night, they found themselves sitting outside the cafe, watching the stars. "You know," Emma said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I've been thinking about what's next for this place." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Next? You've already turned it into the most talked about spot in town." Emma smiled. "I know, but I don't want to stop here. I've been thinking about opening another cafe in the next town over, a place where we can keep this idea going." Michael considered this for a moment. "That's a big step." "I know," Emma admitted, "but I think it's worth it. What we've built here, it's not just about coffee. It's about showing people that connection is possible even when it feels impossible." Michael nodded. "If anyone can pull it off, it's you." In the months that followed, Emma began planning the expansion. Michael, though initially skeptical, offered his support, sharing his business expertise and helping her navigate the logistics. The project brought them even closer, solidifying their unlikely partnership. When the second cafe, named the Ember Hearth, opened its doors, it carried the same spirit of inclusivity and dialogue as its predecessor. The grand opening was a celebration of community, with live music, speeches, and, of course, plenty of coffee. Emma and Michael stood side by side, marveling at how far they had come. Looking back, it was almost surreal to think that it had all started with a single moment of conflict. What could have been a fleeting argument had instead sparked a movement, one that reminded people of the power of human connection. As the sun set on the town that evening, casting a warm glow over the bustling cafe, Emma and Michael couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They had proven that even in a world full of division, there was always room for understanding. And sometimes all it took was a willingness to sit down, listen, and share a cup of coffee. As the Ember Hearth settled into its new rhythm, the energy around the cafe's mission continued to evolve in unexpected ways. Emma, now juggling responsibilities between the two locations, found herself frequently reflecting on how the journey had transformed her, not only as a business owner, but as a person. What had begun as a localized effort to bridge divides was now something much larger, a catalyst for change that inspired communities near and far. The expansion brought new faces into the fold. One notable newcomer was Raj Patel, a retired mediator who had recently moved to the area. Drawn by the buzz surrounding the cafe, Raj began attending the dialogue nights regularly. His presence soon became indispensable as his years of experience in conflict resolution added a layer of depth to the discussions. Raj suggested organizing themed events centered on pressing societal issues, such as immigration, public health, and technology ethics. Emma loved the idea. She and Raj worked together to launch a series called Bridging the Gap, with each session focusing on a single topic. The format included a panel of experts from different perspectives, followed by small group discussions facilitated by trained volunteers. The series was a hit, drawing crowds that often filled every seat in the cafe. One evening, during a Bridging the Gap event on the topic of economic inequality, Michael found himself sitting across from a tech entrepreneur named Clara. The two couldn't have been more different. Clara was a staunch advocate for universal basic income, while Michael believed in minimal government intervention. Despite their contrasting views, the conversation was thoughtful and productive. "What I've realized," Clara said at one point, "is that we're often arguing about solutions without first agreeing on the problem." Michael nodded. "You're right, and sometimes we don't even understand the reasons behind each other's solutions. Meanwhile, the original The Ember Roast in town remained a beloved fixture. Regulars continued to gather and the cafe's culture of open dialogue deepened. Margaret, the retired teacher, began leading book clubs that explored works focused on empathy and understanding. Local artists used the cafe as a venue to showcase pieces inspired by themes of connection and unity. One day, Emma received an email from a community organizer in a city several states away. Inspired by the cafe's story, they wanted to replicate its model in their own neighborhood. Emma was floored by the idea that the ethos of the Ember Roast could spread even further. She spent hours on video calls with the organizer, sharing insights, offering guidance, and helping them adapt the concept to fit their community's unique needs. As the cafe's influence grew, Emma realized that its true impact wasn't measured by sales or foot traffic. It was in the stories people carried with them, the moments of understanding, the connections forged, the walls broken down. What had started as a small act of defiance against division had blossomed into a movement, proving that even the most entrenched differences could be softened by conversation, empathy, and a shared commitment to seeing each other as human. And as Emma watched a new generation of patrons walk through the cafe's doors, she felt hopeful. The journey had taught her that change rarely happened overnight, but it could start anywhere. Sometimes with nothing more than a cup of coffee and a willingness to listen. As the success of the Ember Roast and the Ember Hearth continued to grow, Emma found herself reflecting on how much she had changed over the years. What once felt like an isolated, perhaps even naive attempt to foster understanding in a divided world had blossomed into something far greater than she had ever imagined. People from all walks of life now saw the Ember Roast as a model for what communities could be, a place where differences weren't erased, but celebrated. However, with success came new challenges. As both cafes became well known, Emma faced pressure to scale the concept. There were talks of opening more locations, franchising, and even creating a non-profit wing focused on fostering civil discourse. It was an exciting prospect, but Emma felt the weight of responsibility. She couldn't help but wonder if expanding too quickly would compromise the soul of the cafes, the personal touch that made the Ember Roast and the Ember Hearth so unique. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on the cafe refusing service based on a MAGA hat? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.